Chapter 21. Don't Let Go. The outer skywalk looked like a line drawn through the middle of a dying prayer. It ran away from the broken turn where Julian had vanished onto the royal access road, a narrower path of white stone and silver ribs hanging over the inner palace gardens and then bending hard around the lower spire shell. In calmer hours it would have been lovely. Everything in the upper capital was lovely when it wanted praise badly enough. Now the whole span shook under the crown pulses and dropped pale dust into the screaming air below. Marcus still had one arm around my waist. I tore free of him. "Tell me the way," I said. He did not waste breath trying to stop me again. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. Marcus never mistook delay for protection once the true shape of a moment had shown itself. Felix was already on his knees by the cracked rail, route slate open, hair whipped half loose by the wind and the shock pulses coming off the failing capital crown. He stabbed one finger at the map lines sketched in frantic silver on the slate. The royal line goes straight up the inner spire shell. You can't take it. The outer maintenance walk wraps around the music galleries, cuts behind the north bell tower, and joins the Skyheart service crown at the western hinge. Plain speech, Marcus snapped. Felix glared at him without looking up. Run the outer bridge, keep left where it forks, ignore the ceremonial stairs, and if a silver door tries to ask you a question, sing back. That was, infuriatingly, plain enough. The capital pulse hit again. The whole sky above us flashed white. Over the palace spire the great route crown opened a fraction farther than before, an enormous ghostly geometry of silver roads unfolding over the city and then wrenching itself half-closed with a sound too large for the ears to hear cleanly. The visible route lines beneath it answered in pain. One high bridge over the south residence wing sheared off and dropped in a spray of light. 100 voices cried out below. Marcus caught my shoulder once. Hard. Direct. Get to him, he said. Not stay safe. Not be careful. Not any of the little lies adults tell when they want to hide the size of the danger from the people they send into it. Get to him. I nodded once and ran. The first span was still mostly whole. The second was not. A section near the midpoint had dropped where one of the support ribs tore loose, leaving a gap no more than 6 feet wide and all of Virelia's lower air beneath it. 6 feet is nothing in a lane, in a workshop, in any ordinary world where the ground keeps its bargains. 6 feet over open cloud with the city convulsing around you is another thing entirely. I hit the broken edge at speed and jumped before fear could count. The crown case slammed against my back on the landing. My boots skidded. I caught the far rail with one hand and kept moving. Below the skywalk, the inner palace gardens had become a maze of running people and fallen light. Harrow guards were driving evacuation lines under the east gallery with the efficiency of soldiers and estate wardens both. Palace servants in white and silver no longer looked like ornaments. They looked like human beings with their sleeves tied back, hauling one another over rails and down steps while the route lamps above them cracked and spat. I saw Vivienne once through a gap in the railwork. She stood on the lower terrace fountain rim because the paving had tilted too badly to trust level footing and was signaling carriage teams toward the open south arch while one hand held the route map strip someone had shoved at her. She looked up as I crossed the broken span. For one heartbeat our eyes met across falling light and screaming bells. She pointed. Left. Up. Then turned back to the court without wasting another second on the fact that I had understood. The outer walk bent around the old music galleries. The same galleries beneath which the hidden North Star room had waited in moonlight. The same place where my mother's lullaby had woken the floor and the old star dial had shown me the shape of the crown I now carried on my back. The palace, it seemed, enjoyed closing circles only after bleeding everyone involved. The walk narrowed here into a maintenance path no guest was ever meant to notice, a spine of pale stone and metal braces bolted against the outer curve of the gallery roof. Once, long ago, decorators had disguised the support ribs with carved silver leaves. Most of those had snapped away now, leaving only sharp edges and bare utility. The city pulsed again. The gallery wall beside me flashed white through the seams and then dimmed so violently I nearly lost my footing. For one terrible second the path ahead vanished in the strobe. When sight returned, a fallen lantern chain was whipping across the outer bend like a metal lash. I ducked under it and kept going. The air above the capital had stopped behaving like weather. The great route crown over the spire was no longer only a hidden structure glimpsed in pulses. Each convulsion made more of it visible against the daylight, an enormous silver architecture trying to unfold itself over Virelia's sky and being dragged half-closed by the old seal, the forced command sequence, and perhaps the city's own refusal to fall cleanly. The visible route lines below it were being bent like embroidery under a frame too tight for the fabric. Julian was somewhere inside that. The thought did not feel like thought. It felt like a wound with feet. At the gallery fork, the path split exactly as Felix had warned. One branch sloped inward toward the ceremonial stairs, broad, elegant, and already half collapsed under fallen statuary. The other ran left along a lower service crown around the bell tower base, narrow enough that I had to turn my shoulder to clear one broken buttress. I took the left. A bell above me cracked on the next pulse. Not the full bell, the suspension brace. The sound it made was not ringing, but the scream of metal under too much sudden force. Something huge shifted overhead. I threw myself flat against the wall just as the bell's outer bronze lip sheared away and crashed through the empty air where I would have been half a breath later. The force of its passing pulled me toward the edge. My boots lost purchase. My shoulder hit stone. For one sick heartbeat the city opened beneath me in white terraces and falling route light and the long impossible drop toward the clouds below. Then my hand closed on the old support seam beside the wall. The silver line there flared under my grip. A short strip of path appeared where none should have been, only 2 steps worth. No more bridging the slick broken section long enough for me to scramble back onto stable footing before the line vanished. I stared at the place where it had been. The crown case on my back had warmed. Of course the road would answer now, after all the old rooms and hidden chambers and one city falling to prove it had meant every word. I yanked the case free, dropped to one knee behind the bell tower buttress and opened it. The finished crown lay inside the felt lining like captured moonlight taught to breathe. My mother's side. Mine. White lilies and hidden silver returns, old wind looms folded into the living pattern, the answering structure invisible unless one knew exactly where beauty stopped and mechanism began. It did not blaze. It did not announce itself like prophecy. It rested in the box with terrible composure, as if the fact of the city collapsing around it altered nothing essential about what it had been made to do. I lifted it out. The inner band was warm. Not enough to wear. Not yet. Enough to know the route had recognized its own future in the work. A line ahead had broken where the tower support joined the next skywalk segment. I could see the gap through the whipping dust and white glare, a narrow, jagged distance too wide to jump cleanly while carrying the crown and too unstable to trust if I tried to edge around the tower shell. I held the crown with both hands. Not prayer, not command, only what the old rooms had always wanted instead. Answer. The route pulse struck the city again and the crown lit in my hands. Soft first, then clean. The hidden silver returns under the lilies woke and threw a thin bright line from the crown's outer arc to the broken seam ahead, not a full bridge, not a road any sane engineer would sign his name to, only a short living path of white answer hung over open air. I ran over it before terror could begin counting. The path held exactly as long as my body required. No longer. When my trailing boots struck the far stone, the light folded back into the crown and left only the shaking metal brace and the scream of the sky above. Good. I did not need miracles. I needed enough. The service crown brought me around the bell tower and into the shadow of the central spire. Up close, the palace's tallest structure no longer looked like architecture and pride. It looked like a wound wrapped in white stone. The lower shell had split along old silver seams. One whole balcony ring hung twisted and useless over the inner garden void. The rout lamps around the base had all blown except two, and those stuttered in weak, painful bursts that made the carved reliefs on the wall look alive for half a second and then dead again. At the western hinge, a silver door barred the way forward. Not tall, not grand. A maintenance seal built into the spire shell with no visible handle and a central 4-point mark cut into its face. Felix had been right. The door asked a question. I could feel it the moment I stepped before it. Not words. Pattern. The same old route logic as the hidden gallery, sharper now because the city was no longer interested in metaphor. I set the crown lightly against the mark and hummed the opening phrase of my mother's lullaby. Nothing. The next pulse from the capital crown hit. The seal flashed. Still nothing. Not the opening phrase then. Not the memory of route. This door sat nearer the Skyheart core itself. It wanted the part of the old line tied not to roads but to return. I swallowed once, then sang the inward turn, the softened phrase I had always thought my mother used simply to settle the song down before sleep. The seal opened at once. Not dramatically. The silver mark parted like a held breath and the door slid inward on silent old guides, releasing a gust of cold air and brighter route light from within. I stepped through and the door closed behind me. The western hinge passage ran upward in a narrow spiraling corridor built between the spire's inner and outer walls. One side held arrow-slit windows opening over the falling city. The other was lined with old route channels carrying too much light through too little stone. Each pulse of the great route crown outside ran visibly through those channels and made the whole passage flash in sequences like veins under skin. The city beyond the slit windows was breaking. I saw it in fragments as I climbed. A northern skybridge dropping in 3 clean sections. A palace roof garden sliding a little toward the lower terraces as though the island beneath it had sighed and forgotten its own height. 3 route skiffs trying to hold a freight platform in place with emergency tethers while people spilled off the far side in white and dark specks. The lower districts below the administrative rise still holding, but only because the upper capital was dragging against them like a body beginning to fall and not yet allowed to complete the motion. Julian, I thought. Julian, hold. The stairs steepened. At one landing the outer wall had cracked wide enough that I could see the full great route crown above the spire for the first time. It was vast. That was the first true thing. Not symbolically vast. Architecturally impossibly vast. A crown made of roads and route arcs, petals of silver light folding over the capital in enormous layered geometry, half opened and straining against the old seal logic that still tried to force it closed under command. The ordinary city routes below it looked like embroidery threads caught under the shadow of some enormous living instrument. At the center of that crown, directly over the highest chamber of the spire, a white wound burned. The Skyheart core. And somewhere in there Julian was holding the line with nothing but the crown blood he had been taught to spend since childhood and not enough of the answer line beside him. Fear moved through me so hard I had to stop climbing for one breath and brace both hands against the stone wall. Not because I doubted the road, because I could feel how near I was to losing him in a way that had nothing to do with whether his body lived through the next 5 minutes. A man can leave himself behind long before dying if a city asks often enough and the crown teaches him early to call that virtue. No. I pushed away from the wall and climbed faster. The final stair opened into the Skyheart outer chamber. The room beyond had once been beautiful in the palace way high, circular, all white stone, mirrored ribs, and route light designed to make the crown appear blessed rather than engineered. Now half of that beauty hung broken around the truth. 2 of the upper gallery rings had collapsed inward. The floor on the east side had split in a long crescent, revealing lower silver channels under the polished white shell. The central doors into the true core stood open, their old seal lines burning far too bright. And Julian was there. He stood inside the core threshold with both hands on the inner route frame, and his body bowed just enough to tell the truth of the strain even before I saw his face. White light from the sky-heart chamber beyond poured around him in violent pulses that turned him alternately gold and bloodless. The line of his jaw had gone hard with pain. Sweat and route light made his hair cling at the temples. One sleeve had been torn nearly to the elbow. The visible skin beneath bore the red-white marks of route backlash where the old command path had tried to use him as it had always used his line. He was still standing. That was the first miracle. He turned when I crossed the ruined chamber threshold, not because he heard my boots over the roaring pulse of the city, but because some part of whatever bound us through all the old rooms and routes knew my line had reached him. For one heartbeat his whole face changed. Not relief alone. Something deeper. Almost disbelief. Almost pain. Almost the expression of a man who has been holding a falling city with his own bones and has just seen the one answer he wanted most step through the door carrying the impossible in both hands. Cora. The sound of my name in that room made the whole climb worth the terror. I kept moving. The floor between us had split in two places where the route light had burned through the decorative shell. One broken section tilted toward the inner chamber void. I stepped across the first crack, vaulted the second because there was no time left for caution, and nearly lost the crown to the next pulse when the whole chamber rang. Julian left the route frame. Just one hand. Only for a second. Enough to catch my elbow and keep me from pitching into the broken seam. The contact sent route light through both of us in a clean, sharp line. I looked at his face. No prince. No ballroom miracle. No gentle civilized room where feelings could be arranged into safety. Only the man who had held too much for too long, and the terrible brightness of loving him in the exact moment it became useless to pretend the feeling was still vague enough to manage. "You're late," he said. I laughed. The sound broke halfway through and turned into breath. "You said come to you." He closed his eyes for one fraction of a heartbeat. When he opened them again, the light in them had gone so raw it frightened me. The sky-heart pulse hit. The floor shook. A white crack ran another inch up the inner door frame. Somewhere below, the city screamed. Julian's knees buckled once under the backlash. Instinct moved me before thought. I shoved the crown into his hands. Not delicately. Not ceremonially. Into him. Against his chest and wrists and the whole impossible royal line the kingdom had spent for years and was still trying to drag empty. "Take it," I said. His fingers closed around the crown by reflex. The hidden silver returns lit. For a second he only stared down at it. Then at me. The understanding that crossed his face in that instant was so complete it left no room for half-truth between us anymore. The returning crown. My mother's work. Mine finished into it. The answer line carried not as adornment, but as structure. Not for a bride displayed. For a road reopened. Julian's voice came out rougher than I had ever heard it. "Cora, now I'm the one who won't let go." The words left me before I had time to be afraid of them. For one impossible heartbeat everything stopped. Not the city. Not the route pulses. Only the human space between us. Then something in him broke open. Not weakness. Not collapse. The terrible opposite. Hope. It hit his face so cleanly that I felt the whole weight of the chamber shift around it. He lifted the crown, and I thought for half a second he would place it back in my hands out of some last ruin of noble instinct to spare me the center of his danger. Instead he did the only thing that could have hurt me more and steadied me more at once. He bowed his head just enough for me to set it on him. My hands shook. The crown did not. I lifted it over his hair and settled the band above his brow. White lilies. Old silver. Wind bloom ghosts. My mother's hidden turns and mine answering them. The inner channels for the names not yet woven fully, but waiting. The Varturn structure alive at last around the head of the man the road had always meant it for. The moment the crown touched him, the sky-heart chamber answered. The inner route frame blazed. The silver seams in the floor around us lit in widening arcs. Every pulse above the capital changed pitch, from convulsing fracture to terrible sustained resonance. The great route crown over the city no longer slammed open and shut. It held in a trembling half-open state as if waiting for one more truth before deciding whether to live. Julian's breath caught hard enough that I thought the line had hurt him. Then he lifted one hand from the glowing frame and caught my wrist. The backlash in his skin felt different now. Not gone. Distributed. No longer all returning into him alone. Again, he said. I stepped inside the core with him. The true Skyheart chamber lay beyond the threshold, not as a room built for kings, but as an old machine built for answer. Circular. Black crystal at the center. Pale route arcs running up into the domed ceiling. The whole capital map burned above us in suspended silver, and above that the vast half-opened great route crown trembled like a held breath waiting to become road. The central ring in the floor recognized the crown at once. The relief channels beneath our feet lit in the same hidden pattern as the north gallery dial, only far larger. Royal line here, woven line there, and between them, in the center, the opening structure where Cord had once completed what command could only wound. Julian drew me with him onto the inner ring. The route pain in his face had not vanished, but something else ran under it now, strength, yes, and astonishment, and the kind of unbearable tenderness that has no decent place to live while cities fall. I saw all of it because the old chamber light refused to lie for us. Together we reached for the frame. His hand on the royal line, mine on the answering channel. The great route crown over the city opened wider. Below us, through the suspended map, I saw the capital's shattered routes catch and begin to pull into cleaner shape. The north quarter stopped dropping. 2 broken skybridges held long enough for evacuation lines to clear. The palace gardens, which had been sliding slowly eastward relative to the lower terraces, steadied by a degree. The city was not saved. Not yet. But it had stopped dying fast enough to count in screams. Julian let out one shaking breath. It's taking. The chamber agreed. Lines of old silver script rose around the inner ring, clearer than any before because the Skyheart core had no reason left for subtlety. Crown recognized. Woven answer recognized. Name-bearing work active. The light intensified. I could feel the route through my whole body now, not as pain the way it cut through Julian, but as immense tension waiting to resolve. A road folded too long, finally trying to remember its true shape. I thought of every old room, every cut record, every hidden line my mother had buried in hand and song. All of it was here now, not as history, but as mechanism moving under my skin and his at once. The central black crystal split open in white light, not breaking, opening. Behind it, where I had expected perhaps the core axis or some final command lattice, stood another door. No more than a door, a final seal. A vertical crown-shaped aperture cut into the deepest wall of the Skyheart chamber, its edges lined with the same hidden silver pattern as the inner channels of the returning crown. It had been invisible until the route took our shared line. Now it burned in pale living arcs and remained shut. The script above the ring changed. Chord begun. Core path waking. Final seal unopened. Julian's face tightened. So close, I looked from the final seal to the crown on his head and then back to the script. The route light around the chamber had changed again, steadier now, less frantic, but still unfinished. The capital above us was being held in a terrible suspension, as if the city balanced on the knife edge between fall and rebirth, and all of it depended on what this last seal would accept. More script rose. Slower. Deliberate. A sentence the old world had apparently saved for the exact moment when two idiots in love and an endangered kingdom stood in the center of it. Name recognized. Answer recognized. Vow pending. The whole chamber went silent. Not truly. The capital still trembled. The rout still burned. The sky beyond the broken crown still rang with stressed light. But inside me, inside him, inside the exact space between us, silence fell with the weight of revelation. The final seal did not want crown and answer alone. It wanted what stood between those lines. Spoken. Given. Returned. The vow. Of course. My mother's notation. The vow must be returned, not taken. The old chamber in the boundary ruin. The gallery dial. The hidden channels in the crown. Everything had led here, and I had still, somewhere stupid and hopeful in my bones, imagined perhaps that mechanism might spare us the final honesty by taking intention as implied. It would not. The old roads refused theft even of the heart. Julian looked at the script, then at me. Every light in the chamber seemed to narrow to that one turn of his head. The crown on him glowed softly, white lilies alive against the rout blaze, silver returns lit under the outer band. He looked half made of light and pain and every impossible tenderness I had been trying not to name since the harbor. The city shuddered under us. A lower route line in the suspended map cracked and recovered. The final seal remained shut. Cora, he said. Only my name. Yet it held everything the mechanism had not yet been granted. My pulse had gone wild enough to hurt. Not from fear of him. From a sheer frightening clarity of wanting to say too much and knowing, somehow, that this room would take nothing less than truth. I stepped closer. The inner ring under our feet answered by brightening another degree. Not opening. Waiting. Julian's free hand rose as if he meant to touch my face again and stopped, hovering in the rout-lit air because even now some part of him still asked before taking what mattered. I leaned into that paused hand before he could turn it into restraint. His fingers met my cheek, warm this time despite everything, shaking a little. The final seal burned brighter, still closed. He let out one breath that sounded almost like defeat and almost like wonder. I don't know how to say it fast enough for a falling city. That nearly undid me. Because only Julian would reach the core of a world-breaking rout chamber, with the capital hanging over open sky and the great rout waiting on his heart, and worry first about whether his truth was being unfair to the city. A laugh escaped me. Breathless. Trembling. Too close to tears to count as laughter at all. We don't have to be elegant, I said. The script over the ring flickered. Vow pending. No elegance then. Only truth. The capital pulse struck again. The half-open great rout crown above us flashed and groaned. A piece of the outer city map dimmed dangerously at the west edge and then steadied because the shared line between us was still holding enough to keep the roads from falling apart outright. Not much time. Julian looked at the seal, then back at me, and I knew before he spoke that he would try, in one last stupid princely way, to give the city precedence over the heart if he could find a sentence that somehow served both. No, not this time. Not through another chamber built by people wise enough to know that what saves a world must be freely given. I put my hand over the one he still held against my face and felt the rout answer through both our skin. The seal brightened. Still closed. Waiting. Waiting. Waiting for what neither crown nor lineage nor hidden bloodline could force. The vow. I swallowed once. The whole chamber saw it. The whole city might as well have. Then I met his eyes and knew, with the clean force of standing on a road finally true underfoot, that whatever came next, I had already crossed the line beyond hiding from it. The final seal did not open, but it had begun to listen. Chapter 22. The day the sky chose us, the chamber waited for our truth with the patience of something older than any kingdom. The script above the inner ring did not fade. The final seal did not open. The great rout crown over the capital held in that terrible half-born state, bright enough to keep the city from dropping cleanly into the clouds and not yet whole enough to save it. Around us, the sky-heart chamber pulsed with the strain of a road trying to remember how to become itself. Below us, through the suspended map, Viola trembled. I could see the capital in pieces through the silver projection. The northern quarter still leaned wrong. 2 palace bridges remained dark. The outer administrative lane flickered in and out as if the city were breathing through broken ribs. Every pulse that moved through the great rout crown sent fear and light together across the map beneath our feet. But the chamber no longer wanted fear. It wanted a vow. Julian's hand remained at my cheek, warm and shaking a little despite the rout light burning through him. The crown I had finished sat on his head and glowed with its own quiet certainty now, lilies white as breath in winter, hidden silver alive beneath them. The old wind blooms folded into the band looked less like dried memory and more like a thing that had waited to wake. He looked at me as if the whole city had narrowed to the exact space between us. Not because the city mattered less. Because this, somehow, was the point on which it turned. "I have loved you badly," he said. The words startled a breath out of me. Not because I had doubted what lived in him. Because I had not expected truth to arrive in that shape. The script above the ring flickered once. Listening. Julian's mouth tightened in something too raw to be called a smile. "That sounds wrong. Not the loving. Only the way I've done it." His thumb shifted once against my cheek, grounding himself or me, I could not tell which. "I kept trying to protect you by deciding the shape of your danger before you could choose it. I kept thinking if I took enough of the weight, the road might ask less of you." The chamber brightened another degree. The final seal stayed shut. His voice had gone rough with the strain of holding the line and the greater strain of saying what no court training had ever taught him to say quickly and honestly. And even knowing that was wrong, I still wanted it. I still wanted to keep you away from the worst of this. Not because I doubted you. Because every time the route opened with you near it, I wanted the world to take less from you than it has already taken. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. Below us the map flashed. The west edge dimmed dangerously, recovered and held. The city was still hanging there, half saved, half falling, while he gave me the cleanest truth he had. "You make it quieter," he said. "Not only the pain. Everything false around it. The palace. The title. The shape other people tried to build around me." His gaze did not leave mine. "When I am with you, I know exactly what I want. And I have wanted you from the night you were running with that crown in your arms and the whole harbor went wrong around us." The final seal blazed white, still closed. Listening harder now, if light can be said to listen. I laughed once through the ache in my chest because, impossibly, even there he still managed to be honest in a way that undid me more than perfect lines ever could. "That was not my most composed moment," I said. "No," he said, and the roughness in his voice softened by a hair. "It was mine." The memory struck between us all at once. The harbor square. The Star Festival. The dropped crown. His hand catching it. The impossible flare. The platform giving way under me. His body following without hesitation. Asterisk this time I won't let go. Asterisk only now it was not the first time. And I was not the one falling alone anymore. The chamber seemed to know that too. The silver lines in the floor ring rose brighter around our feet and traced the hidden channels inside the crown. On the suspended map, the great route crown over the city steadied a fraction wider than before, as if the road itself had leaned closer to hear the answer. My pulse had gone so wild it felt useless to pretend I could speak carefully anymore. "I left because I thought staying would let them use you through me," I said. "And I hated it. I hated every stare I took away from you." The words came faster now, not polished, not arranged, only true. I told myself distance was kindness. I told myself if I got out of the palace and out of their rooms, I could stop being the easiest wound to press in you. Julian closed his eyes for one breath, opened them again, stayed. I know. No, I said softly, because this mattered too. I don't think you did. Not all of it. The whole chamber was too bright now. My eyes burned, though whether from light or feeling I could not have said. I left because loving you had already become something I couldn't hold safely inside my own skin, and the palace made it feel like if I stood beside you 1 second longer, they would turn that into another instrument and call it statecraft. The script above the ring flared and then steadied. Vow pending. Not accusation. Not impatience. Only truth waiting for the rest of itself. I took my hand from over his and pressed it against the inner line of the crown instead, feeling the hidden return channels hum under the lilies and silver. My mother's work. Mine. The road between them. But I came back, I said. Julian's breath caught. His whole body heard the line before the room did. So did the room. The capital map under us surged brighter through the palace quarter. A broken bridge over the inner garden lifted by half a hand and held. Somewhere in the city below, thousands of people were still running, crying, hauling one another out from under falling stone and failed light, and still the road waited here, because this was the fulcrum and it refused to move on lesser terms. I came back because it stopped being about whether the palace approved of me or whether the city feared me or whether I could bear wanting you in rooms that wanted to use it against us. I swallowed once. I came back because the road keeps choosing answer over command, and every time it did, it led me to you. The words left me and the whole chamber changed. Not violently. Deeply. The silver channels around the inner ring lit in full. The hidden name paths in the crown answered. The final seal in the wall before us shimmered, no longer a shut door exactly, more like a held membrane of light between one form of the city and another. Julian looked at me as if every route in his body had been cut open and made clean. Cora. Only my name. But this time his voice carried all the rest of it. I stepped closer until there was no room left for court distance, no room left for the lies that etiquette tells bodies in danger to preserve them. My hand rose to the edge of the crown where it rested against his hair. The hidden silver channels thrummed under my fingers. This isn't a wish crown anymore, I said. The line came out so soft I almost thought the chamber would miss it. It did not. The script overhead brightened to a white I could feel through my bones. It's a promise, I said. Not one taken. Not one arranged. One returned. My throat shook once, and I let it. I love you, Julian. Not as a prince the city kneels to. Not as a line meant to hold a kingdom alone. I love you as the man who caught me before I fell and kept reaching for me after every room in the world told him to choose something easier. The final seal roared. Not opening. Answering. The great route crown above the city flared so bright in the suspended map that for a heartbeat Violia vanished behind it. Light ran down every hidden channel in the floor and up every pale arc in the dome overhead. The inner ring under our feet stopped trembling and became steady. Julian made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not pain. Not relief. Something stripped bare of both and made almost unbearably tender by being heard at last. His free hand came to my face fully this time, no hesitation left in it, and he bent toward me just enough that the route light changed around us and the whole chamber seemed to narrow to the space our breaths shared. I love you, he said. No title. No hedge. No princely restraint to soften the cost of hearing it. I loved you before I understood the shape of it. I loved you in the harbor when the whole sky went wrong and all I could think, absurdly, was that I did not know your name yet and could not bear the idea of losing you before I learned it. A tiny broken laugh touched the edge of the words and vanished. I loved you in every old room after that because you kept choosing truth even when it hurt you first. The city pulsed under us. The capital crown held wider. Still the seal waited. Julian's thumb trembled once against my cheek, then steadied. "I do not want a kingdom that costs you your place beside me," he said. "I do not want a road bought with your silence. I do not want a future where the city survives and you are shut out of it because men like or mistake control for order." His gaze burned through me with a force that had nothing to do with the route and everything to do with choice. "If the road opens, I want it with you. If the city stands, I want it because you stood with me. Not behind me. Not hidden for me. With me." The script above the ring shattered into light. Not broken. Fulfilled. Vow recognized. The final seal in the wall opened. The sound it made was not mechanical. It was the sound of something folded too long finally remembering the shape of release. White silver light poured through the crown-shaped aperture in a vertical rush, and behind it the true Skyheart axis appeared, not a room, not a throne, but a descending core of braided route light running straight through the palace spire and outward into the hidden crown over Violia. At the center of that axis hung the final lock, a suspended crown ring of black crystal and silver, much smaller than the city-wide great route shape and much more intimate, like the working heart from which the larger crown had once grown. It held 2 empty channels at opposite sides and one central clasp point where no command rod would ever fit. Only an answering structure. The returning crown on Julian's head blazed white. The hidden channels inside it completed at last, not because I had woven them fully in advance, but because the chamber took our spoken truth and ran it through the structure like silver, finding the grooves it had always been waiting for. Names woke inside the crown. Not letters. Never letters. Rhythm. Pause. Return. The exact hidden line of Julian in one side. The exact answering line of me in the other. I felt them both at once under my fingertips and would have cried out if the route light had not taken the sound and turned it into motion. The crown lifted from Julian's head, not by magic trickery or theatrical force. By answer. It rose between us on a column of white light and hovered in the center of the inner ring, lilies bright as stars, silver channels fully alive now with the names woven invisibly through them. The final lock in the axis answered by splitting open its side channels. Julian grabbed my hand. I grabbed his back. Together we stepped into the core. The city vanished. Then returned. Then became everything. There is no easy language for what the Great Route was in its true opening state. It was road, yes. It was mechanism, yes. It was also relation made structural. A kingdom held not by one line commanding downward, but by countless answered tensions moving through one another without theft. I felt the outer chains, the western braids, the market lanes, the little working routes between terraces, the big ceremonial lines over the palace, the broken sky bridges, the tilted island weight, the hidden crown over it all. None of it as abstract map, as living pull. The returning crown settled into the final lock. The names in its inner channels met the open side paths in the axis. The central clasp did not close. It released. Light tore upward through the Skyheart chamber and outward into the city. Not violent. Not convulsing. Not the white wound Orin's command path had forced. This was different. The kind of brightness that makes broken things remember what they were before the break and then ask whether they still wish to be. The great route crown over Violia opened fully. Below us, through the suspended map, the capital changed. The palace quarter stopped sinking. The north bridges lifted back into alignment. Broken route shells over the upper city did not merely relight, they rewove, silver lines crossing into forms no current chart had carried, binding cracked paths to old hidden supports and then outward to the western chains in one immense living response. Beyond the capital, the route light raced. East terraces, lower markets, Glassmere, the drifting western line, the half-dead braids over the outer chains, the boundary sky itself. Everywhere the Star Eater seams had bitten hardest, new silver roads ran through them not as command channels but as living braided routes answering one another across the old damage. I saw the black-silver weather over the western boundary split apart under the pressure of restored accord lines. Saw failing guide lights in the lower city steadied from above. Saw the great hidden route over the capital transform from a clenched crown into an open one. The city did not fall. It was caught. All of it. In one impossible widening return. The sky-heart chamber rang with the sound of a kingdom inhaling after years of trying to breathe through a wound. Julian staggered once under the release. So did I. Not from pain exactly. From scale. Then he laughed. The sound startled me so badly I looked at him at once and found him standing there in the middle of the open core, tears in his eyes he had not yet noticed, route light all over him, one hand still locked around mine as if he had no intention of ever testing the city's promise about letting go again. I laughed too. What else was there to do? We were holding a falling kingdom in our joined hands, and somehow laughter was the only thing honest enough for the first heartbeat after survival. The chamber steadied around us. The crown remained in the axis, no longer a separate object so much as a living heart of the opened road. The white lilies at its outer arc did not burn. They shone. My mother's old side and mine had become one work so completely I could no longer tell where one finished and the other began. The script rose one final time, not above us now, but through the whole chamber, as if the route itself had decided it was done speaking only to mechanisms and meant to address the people standing in its center. The vow is returned. The road is opened. The city stands. I think I cried then. Not neatly. Just once, like a body remembering it had passed through terror and was still allowed to be human after. Julian turned toward the suspended map. The people below had begun to look up. That was the next terrible, beautiful truth. The whole city could see it. From the lower bridges to the palace courts, from the workshop terraces to the high noble galleries, Violia was now under an open crown of silver roads no one had seen in living memory. The route light did not hide in technical seams or whisper through buried halls anymore. It ran openly from the sky-heart core through the capital air and outward to the chains beyond. Even from the map's high abstraction I could tell when whole groups of people stopped moving and looked skyward together. The outer sky, where the star-eater seams had once fed on broken lines, now glowed with clean woven paths running through the dark like silver drawn over torn cloth. Everyone can see, I whispered. Julian's grip on my hand tightened. Not from fear, from understanding. Yes, everyone could see. Not only the miracle, not only the city saved. They could see that the opened road did not answer command. They could see that it had awakened only when the crown line and the woven line met. They could see the shape of a truth the broadside had tried to bury under bloodline panic and office language. Somewhere below, Orenvale Court was still alive. Somewhere in the city, nobles and merchants and clerks and servants were all looking up at the same impossible proof. Somewhere on the lower terraces, Master Alara might be standing in the workshop doorway with her apron still on, seeing the whole capital crowned in the road my mother had hidden in a sewing box. Somewhere in the East Court, Vivienne would be watching the open sky and calculating exactly how quickly truth must now be made public before men like Oren learned to rearrange even this. The city stood. The kingdom breathed. And the last battle had changed shape rather than ended. Julian looked at me. Not prince to subject. Not crown to answer line. Only him. We did it, he said. The words were almost boyish in their disbelief. That alone made me love him more dangerously than before. We did, I said. A pulse of new light ran through the map below. Not failing this time. Naming. From the opened crown above the capital, one fresh route branched outward in a line no current chart had ever carried. It crossed the old hidden supports, dipped through the upper market braids, and then turned west with a grace I recognized in my bones. A new road. The chamber seemed to pause with us while it formed. Not yet named. Not yet spoken publicly. Only there, bright and unmistakable, as if the great route itself had decided that if the old roads were to return, they would not do so under the titles of the men who broke them. Julian followed its line in the air and then looked back to me. The city beneath us had gone from screaming to something stranger. Not calm. Astonishment. A whole capital held on the edge between terror and wonder, looking up at a sky that had just chosen answer over command in full view of everyone. The old political battle had not died. It had only lost the safety of being hidden. We still have to tell them, I said. He understood at once. Not the mechanism only. The truth. The erased line. The cut records. The broadside lie. Oren's crime dressed as continuity. All of it. Yes, he said. Below us, on the wide lower square before the palace, people were beginning to gather in visible knots despite the broken routes and fallen stone. Nobles and servants, guards and clerks, market runners and carriage men, all drawn by the same impossible open sky. The saved city was already becoming witness. The road had answered. Now the kingdom would have to hear why.